Hi, and welcome to the Trusted Executive Podcast. I'm here today with Dr. John Blakey, the founder of the Trusted Executive Foundation, which helps CEOs and leaders across all sectors around the globe create a new standard of leadership defined by trustworthiness. Now, John has been named a top 100 global thought leader by Trust Across America, and his work has featured in Forbes, BBC News, Huff and the Sunday Times. So welcome to you, John.
Thank you, David. Yeah, great to be here again, and really looking forward to sharing this morning and with whoever is joining us on the podcast. Great to be here.
Yes, and I'm just thinking actually with this one being choosing to coach today, you're on home territory, being quite a renowned coach. So I'm really looking forward to this particular episode of the podcast.
Yes, all the habits, all 9 habits are close to my heart, but it would be fair to say that this one is just that little bit closer to my heart.
Now, as those who listen to the first podcast will know, the idea of this podcast is to help you as listeners gain a practical understanding of the potential benefits of the trusted executive model for you through taking a deep dive with each of the 9 leadership habits which underpin this model. Now, as you say in the book, John, you didn't just dream up these 9 habits over a glass of red wine. They are a product of 6 years of evidence-based research at Aston Business School for your doctorate, involving over 500 board-level leaders. With a deep passion, you offer the business world an academically rigorous and relevant answer to the question, how do I do trust and why does it matter to my organization? So, John, from your research and as an introduction for those listening, why should they care about trust? And in a nutshell, what did you discover in your research?
Yeah, why should you care about trust? Why trust? Why now? Well, trust is the glue of life, as Stephen Covey said. It's always been referred to as the glue of life. But I think in the times that we're in now, we need that super glue of trust. So, right as we speak, David, we're in the middle of lockdown, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're living in a world where there are some, quite frankly, crazy things going on. And there's a feeling that trust has slipped through our fingers. And, I think all leaders in all institutions are called to stand for trust now. And a lot of leaders do want to stand for trust, but how do they do it? As you said, how do I do trust? And one of the findings of the research is that high trust cultures, the biggest factor in building a high trust culture is the behavior of the CEO or the senior leadership team. So your behavior matters. That role modeling, that leading by example is what cascades trust into a culture over a period of time. And these 9 habits, if you can do these 9 habits that little bit better, that little bit more, then you will be doing your bit to help us build the trust that we appear to have lost in a lot of the parts of our society.
Thank you, John. Just as you were speaking there, it was just a kind of image came into my mind, almost as trust as being some sort of compass for us in these times. Because as you said, I hear a lot of people asking, almost questioning, what do I trust? How can I trust? What do I believe in? What's the trustworthiness seems to be like a compass, an anchor, whatever you look at it, where actually people can return to and know, well, actually, maybe this is something that I can trust in rather than being the answer. I think for me, trust says I'm coming from a place of authenticity with this.
Yeah. I mean, we hear people talk about fake news, about post-truth world. There is this sense of us being cut adrift from the truth, and trust is an anchor, I think, that can root us again. And trustworthiness, I mean, it's just, you use the trustworthiness word. Trustworthiness is being worthy of the trust of others, because I can't control whether you or anybody else trusts me. But what I can look at is my trustworthiness and the habits of that trustworthiness. I can actually focus on those. I can work on those. It's within my gift of control to do that. So I think that gives you a sense of being part of the solution rather than being just, adrift amongst, this sort of sea of uncertainty. It gives you something to focus on if you know that these habits, which are academically verified, they will deliver your trustworthiness if you focus on them Obviously, it takes effort, like all habits, it takes time, but at least it's within your gift to work on your own habits.
And just one question before we go into the habit we're looking at today. And what came to me is, what do you say to the executive who says, do you know what? I don't need to do this because I just trust my gut instinct. I know whether I can trust someone in a deal. I know whether this organization is trustworthy. What would you say to him or her who's kind of saying, actually, for me, it's just gut instinct. I don't need this framework to talk about trust?
Probably what I would say, I would use that Marshall Goldsmith phrase, what got you here won't get you there. That yes, we've all developed naturally certain trustworthiness behaviors in leadership. To get where we are, we will have had to do that to a certain degree. But I think what we're challenged to do now in the world that we are in, with diversity, with globalization, with social media, we're challenged to take those trust building skills to the next level. That's why I talk about the super glue. It's time for trust 2.0. We may well have mastered trust 1.0, but I want to challenge leaders to say, is that enough? Or do you want to go the next leg of the journey? Because I think the modern stakeholders are expecting and demanding that we go the next leg of the journey.
Thank you, John. I like that. And I'd have a sense that actually for that sort of leader who's curious about this, I think you're talking a book about Einstein and curiosity. They're probably curious to see, even if I have a good gut instinct, how does this model work? And also curious to go, actually, how can this be used to empower not just me, but my team and the organization? So I think there's a curiosity, and that's where the relevance and rigor of the research really comes home for me. So today, John, we're going to do a deep dive with habit number 2, which is choosing to coach, which sits under the pillar of ability. I said in the previous one, I'm really drawn by how each habit starts with the word choosing. And we've touched a bit on that, I think, in our initial part of this conversation, because for me, this makes it very intentional. And it's not a one-off. I think we also said that. And as you say, a habit is an accumulation of choices, which I love. So for you, John, what is this habit, choosing to coach, and what benefits does it provide for an organization?
Yeah, choosing to coach. So this word coaching, when I first got involved in coaching back in 2002, it was a very new word in the business lexicon. But I think we've seen over the last 20 years, it's really moved into the mainstream of business life. We all hear about coaching and we all know people who coach. What is it? One of the answers to that question that I heard early on in my training as a coach was that coaching is 70% listening and 30% asking questions. And I still think that's a pretty precise definition of coaching. I would probably refine it a little bit to say 70% active listening and 30% asking powerful questions. Because it's not just any old listening, and it's not just any old questions. So I think in terms of behaviors, those two things are the key behaviors of coaching: listening, asking questions. But behind those behaviors, I think, is the mindset of the coach. And I think the mindset of the coach is the belief in the potential of others, the belief that all of us can go further, can do more, can find more capabilities in ourselves than we ever knew existed. And I think that is the mindset of the coach and leader, is the belief in the potential of others, which then allows them to empower those people to seek that greater performance, that greater capability, because they trust that it's there and it's just waiting to come out. And the listening and the asking questions is unlocking that latent potential.
I love that. And also I'm reminded that in the book you give a couple of examples, I think for yourself, where you said that part of this trusting, in this choosing to coach, is this in the empowering, is, do I believe in you? So do you want to give one of your own examples around what that meant for you when someone was perhaps coaching you, but they chose to believe in you? Because when I read that was very powerful.
Yeah, I mentioned in the book, there are a number of people in my career who have believed in me. And I remember the names of those people, and I name them in the book actually because I want to honor them. That's part of the reason why I name them. But the point is, I remember them because they took the risk of believing in me. And interestingly, we're talking about this habit of coaching. And one of the people who believed in me was Nicholas Brearley, who backed myself and Ian Day to publish a book called Challenging Coaching in 2012, when Ian and I were totally novice, unproven writers. I mean, we didn't know we could write a book. I mean, we daren't sort of believe that we could write a book. But Nicholas Brearley, bless him, said, you know what, I think there could be something in this. And he gave us that empowerment, that belief that we could write. And out of that came Challenging Coaching. And without Challenging Coaching, there wouldn't have been the Trusted Executive. So these moments of people believing in you, when they take that risk to back you, I think it's a wonderful thing. And I think it makes us all think as coaching leaders with this habit, who do we believe in? Who are we willing to back? Who are we willing to take a risk on? Because maybe they're the next superstar, if only someone would get behind them and put that leap of faith, if you like, in their potential.
Yes, absolutely. And also what's a question I have, I'm sure for those listening, is I love the aspect of actually, choosing to empower, choosing to believe in someone, because as you said, that's very powerful. But my sense is for those listening, you can do that from at least two perspectives. I'll choose the main two. One is from a coach perspective, one is from a mentoring perspective. So can you explain the difference to our listeners? Because quite often you might empower someone, it might come from a mentor, it might come from a coach. So what's the distinction, particularly in the organization, please?
Yeah, it's a question that comes up a lot. What's the difference between coaching and mentoring? And we're being very precise about this word as a habit today. The biggest difference for me, David, is this shift from the mentor who knows the answer to all things to the coach who knows no answers to anything. So, it's the shift from wanting to show the world how clever you are to wanting to show the world how clever somebody else is.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And that's why we ask questions. That's why we listen. Because when you're in the presence of someone who is listening that powerfully, asking questions, they act as a midwife to your potential. They invite it out into the world. It's an amazing thing. And I've been coached and I am coached, and it still makes me sort of draw breath at times. The power of the environment that can be created by that listening and by that asking.
And I want to come back to the listening. Before I do, just something actually, when you were speaking, something came to me. You use the analogy of actually in a red pill world. So I guess the film The Matrix, telling people what to do is, it's ineffective. This in the old, or I'm going to call it the older paradigm, because that's more telling people what to do. But as you were speaking, I got a sense of, and if for this moment, I just use perhaps older paradigm, newer paradigm. In the older paradigm, if it was telling, I get a sense that in that paradigm, it was more about the individual. I've got to be the best. And also this aspect of competitive, and I've got to get an edge over someone. And I have the answers to this if I'm a leader. I sense if I say the paradigm we're coming into is more about, it's not really about the individual. It's about the collective for me, because it says as an individual, the leader says, I don't have all the answers. So I need the collective around me. And then the competitive for me then becomes more collaborative. And why I'm saying this, John, I just get a sense of, in that kind of atmosphere, this aspect of then coaching becomes second nature for me, because it says, actually, as you said, I want to empower this person with me, because they can make a contribution to this organization and bring ideas and actions to the table, which I'm not able to do so. But as a collective, we can be so much more powerful. What's your thoughts, feelings around that?
Yeah, I think the new paradigm, in my book Challenging Coaching, I talk a lot about systems thinking, and that we're part of a system, and that system is collective. And actually use one of the phrases you use there is the shift from me to we. And I think part of this new paradigm and trust is the binding together of the collective. It definitely invites us to look for that longer term collective outcome, and believe in the power of that, as opposed to that shorter term individualistic outcome, where we might be able to win the short term game for ourselves, but what are we setting up in terms of the longer term game and the outcome for all of us? I mean, climate change would be a great example, wouldn't it, of, why do I need to bother about climate change? I just want to maximize the here and now, outcomes, whether that's profit or whatever it is that I think is that here and now outcome. But in the process of doing that, I set up unintended consequences around the collective outcomes over the longer term. So part of coaching, I think, is raising awareness of that bigger picture, inviting people to recognize that we are all connected, and that there are ripples that go out from every leader's actions and behaviors, and expanding our awareness of that through coaching helps us take responsibility for that bigger picture environment that we are all part of.
Oh, so much in there. I love that. And I love that. I think you said, trust is the binding together of the collective. I think that is just so powerful, and just got a real sense, actually, which I hadn't thought of before, that around this choosing to coach, you're also making a choice in part of the modern language around a choice, I'm going to say, for your language around what they call the triple bottom line. So it's not just the people, it's not just the profit, short-term profit. Yes, profit's in there, but it's more of a longer-term view. It's people, and we talked about planet, so a triple bottom line. So thank you for that insight. And one thing before we move on, because one thing that fascinates me in the book is, obviously we've spoken, I think you raised this talk about it's asking powerful questions, listening, is saying 7% of the time, and it's also empowering, and do you believe in that other? In the book you speak about, on the listening, you speak about listening at 3 different levels. Could you briefly just share that? Because again, I found that really insightful.
Yeah, the 3 levels of listening comes from a book called Coactive Coaching by Laura Whitworth, and a fantastic coaching resource for anybody who's listening. And the 3 levels, Laura talks in that book about sort of everyday listening, level 1, which basically often is described that you're basically full of your own stuff in your own head, and you're sort of just listening in order to confirm or pursue your existing thoughts and line of argument. And that's everyday listening. It's something we all do. We all do. Nobody's walking around, not doing that most of the time. But coaches, when you shift to that level 2, active listening, that's what this word active means, is that you are parking that noise in your own head, and you're clearing the space to focus all of your attention on the words, the body language, the tone of what the other person is saying. So it's like changing gear in a car. I think it is a gear change moment. And then the 3rd level, I think, which is another gear change moment. I'm trying to remember what how I refer to it in the book. You might be able to tell me. She calls it. Let me just check that, because I want to make sure I get it correct. She calls it global listening. Yeah. So she calls it global listening. And the way that I often think of that is it's like being a radio antennae, and you switch the radio antennae on such that you're opening the field of your awareness, and you start to it's for example, it's things like coincidences. In global listening, everything has meaning. So if I was listening to you at level 3 global listening, and the door opened behind you and somebody popped their head round the door and said something, if I was coaching you, I'd be thinking, there is meaning in what just happened. And my job as a coach is to really open my mind and my ears to hear the meaning that is being offered to me by everything that is going on in the system of David Wetton or whoever I'd be working with as a coach. Everything has meaning. So at that level, you can see how sort of it becomes quite profound, that level of listening. And it's very, very hard work. If you listen at level 3 for half an hour, you will be exhausted. That's why we don't do it most of the time. But great coaches, they will be able to turn that antennae on and get to that global listening, as Laura refers to it.
And I also get a sense that when you're perhaps have a fluidity among those 3 levels, then we both know, one of the real beautiful elements of coaching is teasing out perhaps inner wisdom of the coachee that we didn't know was there, they didn't know was there, but it kind of comes out, as you said, this field. And I think if you're aware at this 3rd level, it can start to come in. And one thing that came to me is, I think it's Jung that speaks of this in terms of synchronicity, didn't he? There's an example of, I think it was a Beatles or something that came to his window where someone was telling a story, and he paid attention to that. And I love that example. And there's a sense of it. It's that sort of thing. It's as you said, it's almost being aware of the unexpected, or listening at something, quite often listening at a level that's difficult to put into words, but you have a sense of knowing, or you perhaps even just trust that intuitive knowing to bring it in, as it might be a very challenging question. You're not sure why you've asked it. And then suddenly it really touches the coachee.
Yeah, spot on. And just before you talked about Jung, the word young came into my head. And I thought, and so you see, when you create this type of dialogue, and I think we're sort of coaching, we're sort of in a coaching space, aren't we? I think because we're both coaches, and so we ought to be. And so you start to find that things get pinged in each person's mind, and you suddenly think of something, they think of it a moment later, and you realize that yes, there's a connection, and I love that sense of the sort of mysteriousness of that, which we don't need to fully understand at a scientific level, but if we trust that it's there, it's a great thing.
It is, isn't it? Now, I mentioned before, didn't I, that I gave there's more than one definition of triple bottom line. I know that in your book you talk about the triple bottom line of results, relationships, and reputation. So for this next part, I'm guessing those listening hopefully are getting a real sense of what this habit choosing to coach is. But they're probably curious individuals. They're curious from a practical perspective, asking, I hear what that's saying, but what I really like to know is how have executives actually used this leadership habit to make a real difference in their organization. Now, the great thing is I've recorded a short interview with Fiona Furman, who's communications manager from NAHL Group, and they've chosen as an organization to embed the trusted executive model in their organization. So what we're going to do, and you've not heard this, John, so we're going to ask you to respond after I've played this. I've re-recorded an interview with her, pre-recorded, and we're going to hear from Fiona on how they've used the habit choosing to coach. So once again, I'm with Fiona Furman, the communications manager with NAHL Group, a group of consumer legal businesses, including National Accident Helpline. And as an organisation, NAHL are using the Trusted Executive Framework to empower the way they work and serve their customers. So Fiona, how have you used the second leadership habit, choosing to coach within NAHL, to make a real difference in your organisation?
So at NAHL Group PLC, we have a leadership program called Pathway to Leadership. And what we do with that is that we identify 12 to 16 members of our team each year who we think have got real leadership potential. And then they embark on a 12-month process of development, which is fantastic. And part of that development, alongside all of the formal learning that they do, is they have the opportunity to be mentored and coached by one of our senior leaders, the most senior people in our business. And that's an incredible opportunity for them just to learn and to learn from the experience of those leaders that have gone before them. But as well as that, it's a real opportunity to access the leadership in a way that we probably wouldn't necessarily get a chance to do all the time. But to just bring the ideas and the things that they're challenged by at the moment to that leader and say, what would you do? What's your advice? And also for that leader to challenge back, and together they can then unpick issues and situations that will help them in their leadership journey for the future.
Oh, I really love that. And I get a sense, actually, you know, when John speaks about asking great questions, listening deeply and empowering others by believing in them, what a great way to actually bring that. And I guess the leaders can do all of that and have it mirrored back to them as well.
Absolutely. I've just graduated from the programme myself this year, and having that ability to just talk things through and to talk freely and openly and have that kind of safe space, if you like, to allow yourself in some ways to be coached has been absolutely vital for me in my growth and development. And I imagine it's the kind of thing that I will be leaning on and drawing on probably for the rest of my career, I would think.
And that's just a wonderful kind of, you know, my final question was, you know, what's your personal insight or personal growth moment? And it sounds like you've just described that by being involved and having the trusted executive framework within this process. It feels like a sort of seamless part of support. It really seems to have, you know, empowered you and given you some great growth moments.
It absolutely has. And one of the things for me on a very personal level that has been so interesting for me in this process is that I'm somebody who is very high responsibility. So I tend to think that I should have all the answers and I should have the plan and I should be able to deliver it and know everything and deliver everything to this kind of, you know, probably unattainably high standard. And what being coached and mentored has helped me to understand is that actually it's okay to not have the answers sometimes, and it's okay to reach out to people who might be able to help you find the answers so that you can unearth them yourself. It's not a matter of that expectation is something I'm putting on myself. It's not coming from outside, that expectation to always know everything. And so sometimes taking a step back and having a conversation with somebody who has perhaps been there before as a way of unpicking what a potential answer might be, but it might not be the end answer, has been absolutely invaluable for me.
Oh, I really get that. And what a great way to use the model, and what a fabulous insight that you can take with you, you know, throughout your, you know, your working day. So thank you, Fiona. Thank you for your sharing. I really appreciate you being here.
No problem. Thank you.
So, John, that was Fiona speaking about how they've embedded choosing to coach in their organisation. So the floor is yours, John. I'm interested to hear how you respond to what she said.
Yeah, it's always great, isn't it, to hear people putting this into practice, like Fiona and all the leaders at NAHL Group have done over the past couple of years. And I think, you know, Fiona referred specifically to, you know, how leaders can use this habit around leadership development. You know, that leadership development programs can formalize the coaching relationship between a senior leader and a member of one of those programs. Because I think often leaders want to do this, but they don't always have the time created to play this role, or make time to play this role, and they're not always turning up with that coaching hat on. And I think if you can create a program which has a specific coaching component, and where the leaders involved in that, they know what their role is, you know, one is the coach, one is the coachee, and they both have responsibilities in that conversation to make it the best conversation that they can have. I think if you set it up that way, if you formalize it, if you give people some training, it makes it much easier for leaders to practice this habit, rather than, you know, if I suddenly just bump into you in the corridor and I'm suddenly trying to think about, oh, you know, how do I practice coaching in the middle of this 15-minute conversation at the water cooler? That's I think, in my experience, a much harder way to learn this habit. So leadership development programs like the one that Fiona talked about definitely help organizations introduce this habit and practice this habit. And of course, the more you practice it, then the more everybody can take that into their, you know, daily working life, and over time it does become a habit, you know. But sometimes you need to kickstart it in the way that these programs can help with.
Thank you, John. And what I liked about, and she spoke, didn't she, about it's part of their Pathway to Leadership program, is speaking with her, I get this real sense that actually the trusted executive framework hasn't taken over the organization, it's moved in. So actually it's worked alongside the organization and what they're doing. It's supported their practices. And that just feels really important. So it's not, I hope that makes sense. It's actually, they've actually, feels like to me, they've owned it and sort of made it their own, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and they were in a very good position, starting point to do that, David, because trust has been one of their values, one of their core values for a number of years. And they've wanted to become the most trusted brand in their sector for a number of years. So when they saw the 9 Habits of Trust model, they were already halfway down the path. And they just grabbed it and said, great, that's what we've been looking for. And it's helped them accelerate and create a language, an operational language around trust. But the spirit of it all was already there. And so I think that's what's allowed them to embrace it and as you say, own it in such a seamless way.
Yes, and as you said, be intentional about it. It's not just a, say, water cooler conversation, water cooler coaching. They're intentional about setting it up. And I love when Fiona spoke about having a safe space, because again, there's something intentional about that. There's something feels very life-giving. And the other thing was, I loved her insight of, she said, feeling pressured that she should know the answers. And that wasn't the case. And there was just a sense of actually through this choosing to coach, I really kind of sense that she had a letting go. Actually, I don't need to know the answers, but there's someone here who's coaching me, who, going back to earlier conversations, choosing to believe in me. And there was something, John, about the leaders being intentional with their time. And I think we spoke about this. I spoke about this with Fiona, saying that to those in the program, knowing traditionally how busy leaders are, given they've committed this time to be with them, it almost set up this principle of actually, I believe in you because I'm choosing to spend time with you.
Yes.
Intentional time to encourage. And
yes.
that was, I felt that was wonderful.
Yes. And of course they say about time, don't they, that giving people time is the most generous thing you can do because none of us can create more time. Whereas if you give people, people say, oh, you could give them a salary rise. Well, we can create more money. We can, it's not a finite thing, but time is a finite thing. And so giving time through coaching, yeah, I think it is received as a real generous thing. And, you can imagine the impact on that, on people's, motivation and morale, particularly in the times that we're in at the moment, that if you're giving people that extra bit of time and coaching them in that time.
So John, how does this habit, choosing to coach, how does it work alongside the other habits in the model?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I was thinking about this before our conversation, because in one of the tools we have now in the model is this 9 Habits survey, which we can use to measure the collective strength of these different habits in an organizational culture. And we've used this now with thousands of different leaders, and therefore we've created a benchmark of the habits. And what I can share with you is that the 3 weakest habits on average in organizational cultures, in the organizations that we've been working with, are this one, choosing to coach, choosing to be humble, and choosing to be open. And I think that these 3 habits are related. Because if you think about choosing to coach, if you think about the fact that that means as a coach, you're not the one with the answers, you're not the clever one, then that requires you to be humble. And I think the openness habit is linked to this coaching aspect, because you can imagine in the sorts of space that we've talked about, where you do a lot of listening and you do a lot of asking of questions, that you're inviting an openness from the other person, that they share more of themselves with you. And I think over time, that again is fostering a culture of openness, because as Fiona said, you then get to know that it's safe to share. It's a psychologically safe environment in which to share things. And wow, what a relief. I can be who I am. I can bring myself fully to this place. So these 3 habits, coaching, being humble, being open, whilst coaching is in that pillar of ability and the other 2 are in the pillar of integrity, I do think that they work in tandem. together, and they can support each other, together. But interestingly, they are the 3 weakest typically. And that tells us a lot about where we are on the sort of journey from the command and control, authoritarian, power-based structure to the trust-based culture.
Thank you. Yes, and I sense those connections between those 3 areas, and it's almost like naturally, as you said, when you're coming into this coaching space with this sense of humbleness, this sense of being open, it really almost, if we're talking about empowering the coachee, it kind of feels like it empowers the space that you're together in that respect. And before we move on to the next one, just one question that's come to me, because we're speaking this, and obviously Fiona was speaking herself, her example was around one-to-one coaching. How just choosing to coach, does it function? Because there is team coaching, isn't there? Does it function as well in there? Is that something you encourage in the Trusted Executive as well?
Yeah, very much, David, very much so. I mean, when we do our programs, for example, with organizations like Fiona's, we will often assign individual coaches, but we will also often assign a team coach to the board or to that leadership forum. And for example, that person would attend a board meeting and listen and observe. And then at the end of that discussion, could play back to the group what they have observed in terms of habits that have been strong in that meeting and habits that have been weaker. So having somebody playing that role for the team coach, we call it the 9 Habits Guardian. It can be very powerful as a way of keeping a focus on this, getting honest feedback, through thinking of coaching at a team level. We equally bring together leaders into what we call our Trusted Executive Fellowship boards, like-minded leaders who want to practice with this work from different organizations. And they, when they come together, will experience a team coaching cycle where one of them will present a challenge and the whole group will ask questions. The whole group will listen. And again, I think individual coaching is very powerful, but if you can create that coaching space with a group, with all the wisdom that is in that room, wow, you can really leverage that coaching space at a team level, through these different approaches. So yeah, definitely it's a team habit as well as an individual habit.
Thank you. And I really do feel how you've just taken coaching for me to, it's expanded, and more possibilities. And I get this, having done, coaching with teams myself, I do get the sense of how it's, within the group context as well, it can also have a powerful impact. So thank you for sharing that. We've been talking about impact here. So for the listeners out there, how can they get further resources and get their hands on the experience of this habit of choosing to coach? You mentioned a book or whatever, but what do you recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, well, clearly I recommend this book.
Your book.
So seriously, this is a book about coaching, but it's called Challenging Coaching. So it's about the balance between support and challenge in coaching. Coaching is partly about supporting others. It's also about challenging others, and that's what that book focuses on. But if you want the Bible of coaching, I think I would refer to Sir John Whitmore's book, Coaching for Performance. It was a great privilege that John Whitmore wrote the foreword for our book, Challenging Coaching, because his book, Coaching for Performance, introduced me to coaching, 20 odd years ago. Really opened my eyes to the power of this habit. So that there are some great resources in terms of books, Coaching for Performance, Challenging Coaching. We've mentioned Coactive Coaching already, which is again one of my go-to coaching books. Coaching is a skill, and some of the listeners may think, okay, I can learn from reading a book, but I want to take this further. I want to actually practice this because it is something that is experiential. Being on the receiving end of coaching is a great way to understand its value and learn the skills. And I think if I was going to recommend, a training resource. The Academy of Executive Coaching is a training school in the UK. It's an international school, but it's based in the UK. I've done a lot of my coach training there. I know a lot of other people who have been through their programs, and yeah, I definitely recommend the Academy of Executive Coaching as a place to train. I'm just looking at my list here to see if I've covered everything. So I think it's reading, it's training, and those are the key resources that I would recommend. I mean, in the book, there's a list of various references at the end of the chapter that would also be a reference point for our listeners. But hopefully that's a sort of couple of ideas of where to go next.
Thank you, John. Thank you. So actually, we've spoken quite widely about the habit choosing to coach. I said it's some sense it's home ground for both of us, so it's a great conversation, and we've looked at really how you've grounded this in research, and we've heard how executives such as Fiona have used it and the impact it's had on them and their organization. And something I love about the book Trusted Executive is you have a chapter, Cracks in the Pillar, what to do when things go wrong. And as I said before, this is really gritty, grounded realism for me. And I know you're a pragmatist, John, who walks his talk, who honors failure. But before we dive deeper, I just want to honor that you see this trustworthiness across the three pillars as multiplicative. So multiplies across ability, by integrity, by benevolence. So actually, if you get a 0 score on any of these elements, it impacts across trust as a whole, and that goes, I guess, for each of the individual habits. So we've spoken about choosing to coach. So the question here is, what can an organization do when choosing to coach goes wrong?
Yes, and I'd like to sort of share a story to just bring this one to life a little bit, because a lot of my inspiration around coaching and this habit comes from the world of elite sport. So I had the good fortune earlier in my career to set up a company with an Olympic medalist rower who was also a coach to Team GB rowers. And so I saw how coaching in an Olympic environment took place. And that had a big impact on my own understanding of this habit and an inspiration really to practice it. And one of the relationships that I saw, coaching relationships that I saw, and in terms of something that went wrong and how it was recovered from. So I, over 10 years, witnessed very closely the coaching relationship between Bill Barry, my business partner, who was the Olympic medalist and coach, and his coachee, a guy called Alan Campbell, who, when I first met him, was a 19-year-old novice scholar, single scholar. And they went on this crazy journey where the goal was to win a medal in the Olympics. And Bill had the audacity to believe that Alan had the potential to achieve this goal. I mean, it was crazy stuff in terms of empowerment and belief. Anyway, they went on this journey and they started to sort of achieve certain milestones. And one of the milestones was to win a medal in the Olympics in Beijing in 2008. And by this stage, Alan had won the silver medal in the World Championship in 2007. So he was on track. It was all going to plan. 6 weeks before Beijing Olympics, I got a call from Bill and he said, "Oh, we've had a bit of a problem." And I said, oh yeah. And he said, "Yeah, Alan has got an infection in his tooth. He's had the tooth removed, but the infection has gone into his knee and he's on crutches." So I'm thinking that's 8 years of work down the drain, 8 years of coaching down the drain. And I said to him, I was absolutely devastated for them both. And I said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And he said, "We've got a plan B." And I said, "A plan B? How could there be a plan B? The doctors just told him he's not going to even get in the plane, let alone get in a boat in 6 weeks' time." He said, "Oh, we've got a plan B. And the plan B is that we've worked out that Alan is the rower that is going to improve the most between now and the start of the Olympic Games," which logically was sort of correct, but it was measured from a base point of that the guy was on crutches. Anyway, to cut a long story short, Alan did get on that plane to Beijing. He did win his heat in the single scull. He did get to the semi-final. And I, on the semi-final, was stood outside Euston Station listening with my earpods in, jumping up and down like a madman, because he qualified for the final of the single scull in Beijing, in which he came 6 out of 8. He didn't get a medal, but I tell you, David, it was the most incredible coaching performance I'd ever seen. So the link, and of course, he then 4 years later, he got his medal. He got his bronze medal in 2012. Now, the link to the habits in terms of what to do when things go wrong is the link to the habit of evangelizing, habit number 7. So what did they do at that moment? They renewed their faith in the vision. They didn't give up. They had that resilience to keep going and that sort of perseverance. So I would say that that's the antidote when things go wrong. You believe in someone, you think they can win that medal. It doesn't quite happen. There's a failure, they mess up. Well, that's a time to renew your faith and your hope. And that's what evangelizing does. That's what the great evangelists do. So that to me is the link between coaching as a habit of delivery and evangelizing as a habit of benevolence. And I think that's what I witnessed. Amazing evangelizing from the two of them to get through that journey after such a devastating setback.
Absolutely. And I can still see you jumping up and down in the station there, because what an emotional, wonderful moment. And, probably like yourself, I love the Olympic Games for those stories that are sat behind it. I've read the book, Catherine Granger's book, on what she's done and the time it took to her to get to a gold medal. There's something profound about a journey like that. And as you said, what I really honor, you said that when he got to the final, he was 6. He didn't get a medal, he didn't win. But actually the fact that he got there, given the story, was perhaps even more incredible.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
It's a wonderful, testament to that. Gosh, thank you for that story. Now, John, I know we always mentioned before, you spent a long time with this researching and developing your model. My sense is, through your life, you've built up to investigating and exploring this trusted executive model. And I know how passionate you are about trust, and we can sense the choosing to coach is something that really, is an essence of you. It's part of you. So this is the part of the podcast where we choose to dive a bit deeper. So the question I want to ask is we've heard a little bit of it. We're going a little bit deeper. Why does this habit, choosing to coach, matter to you, John? You said that there's kind of 2 levels for you. So I'm inviting you to be vulnerable and explore and go a bit deeper as to why you believe choosing to coach is so important.
Yeah, thanks, David. And so I'm going to practice habit number 5, which is choosing to be open, showing a bit of vulnerability, scary stuff. But how did I come to be passionate about coaching? Well, the story behind that is that when I was in my early 30s, and I was a very tell driven manager who didn't even know that coaching existed. And if I had done, I would have thought it was a complete waste of time. I was sent on a course called Advanced Change Management. And I sat in a hotel in the New Forest with 2 other participants in this course, with a lady who I didn't realize at the time, but she was a coach. She asked lots of questions. She listened very powerfully. She believed in our potential. And we went there on the Monday morning with a problem from our workplace. We all had to turn up with a problem from our workplace. And she said, right, we're going to sit in this hotel room for 5 days and talk about this problem. And I looked at my watch and thought, blimey, it's not that complicated. We'll be done by 2:00, surely. And I tell you what, David, after 3 days, Wednesday afternoon, after 2.5 days of intense listening, asking questions, coaching, boy, was I digging deeper. And I'd gone into the roots of this workplace problem. I'd gone through the roots of it. I'd gone into into my own sort of character, my own behaviors. And I arrived at about 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. I arrived at a question about my identity. Who am I? So I'd gone from this, superficial problem, and through coaching, I'd got to the root of a question, a very, very important question. Who am I? And in that moment, I had an answer to that question. You, John, are a child of God. And I'm sat there in the middle of this hotel in the New Forest on a business course about advanced change management. And I'm thinking, whoa, what on earth is going on? But I tell you, that was the moment where I encountered my faith, where I stepped into, a world that was very, very different for me, a huge shock, but has been a great blessing, as you know, in my life since then. So, I came away from that course changed at a very profound level, and I wanted to know what that lady had done. I didn't understand what she'd done. I didn't understand what on earth had gone on, but I later realized that this was coaching, and this is what coaching can deliver. Not every time, but I have worked with business leaders, David, who have said to me, I've said to them at the beginning of a coaching session, what are your goals? And they've said to me, I need to improve revenue by 20%. I need to get the employee engagement score up to so and so, and I've got an issue with my chair that I need to resolve. And by the way, I've got one more goal that I'd like to add. And I've gone, well, what's that? I want to find God. And I'm going, oh, seriously, so I have to respect, the depth of some of the questions that have occurred in my life, but also the depth of the question that occur in other people's lives, and coaching is just such a privileged space in which to explore these things. And of course, it all then has a ripple effect back to how the leader shows up. Who is the leader? It all flows back into how you show up, your presence as a leader, and all the things that we've talked about in terms of trust and power and all of these other, leadership dynamics. So that is why coaching is that important to me, this habit, because it changed my life in a very profound way.
Oh, what a powerful story. I totally get that. I hear you, John, totally get that. And for me, one of my definitions, I won't go into fully, we speak about spirituality, speak about religion. For me, spirituality, everyone has spirituality, and it's about meaning and purpose, and that brings you alive in your life. So there's a real sense there, isn't it, that how that coaching then really did tap into that meaning and purpose. That's a deep question. Who am I? from a question you thought was going to be finished by lunchtime, suddenly took you to a great depth is quite amazing. And I guess at this point, I would say that looking at some of the great faith teachers through time, I've just realized two things. One, actually, they choose to be humble, that it's not about me. So there's two things I want to pull on before I ask you a question. One that's coming to my mind is the Buddha, when he described his teachings as being the raft to get you across to the other side. They weren't the answer. They were really something that helped you, but they were like a temporary thing, and they weren't the answer, because very much they want you to find your own answer. This couldn't help you, but it was an empowering thing. So that's the first thing, of that teacher. And the second thing that's coming to my mind, which I'll ask you more about, was Jesus as a coach, because it's just come to me, and I don't have precise numbers, but I have seen this before in the past, that in the Gospels, in the Bible, I know someone's looked at it and said actually that Jesus has asked well over 100 questions, but has probably only told a handful of answers. So in some ways he was really coming from this coaching perspective, because he was asking empowering questions. So at this point, really, I'm going to ask you, how do you see in your Christian faith Jesus as choosing to coach?
Yeah, I mean, you've highlighted an aspect there already of the listening and the asking questions. The other part of obviously Jesus's presence as a coach was parables. You know, he wouldn't answer a direct question because he didn't want to get into a situation where he was positioning himself, you know, or sort of boxing himself in. And so the way that he tried to explain himself was through the use of parables, which is a much more coach-like way to help people than to try to just ram the answer down their throat. I mean, Jesus clearly knew a lot of stuff, but he also respected where his audience was at. And therefore, he tried to communicate in language and in words and in stories that resonated with them, that showed empathy for them, and fitted into their existing, you know, worldview. And I think that's a hugely empathetic thing to do, which is, again, a great skill of a coach. And I mean, one of the aspects of believing in others and believing in the potential of others. I mean, Jesus believed in the blind man to such an extent that the blind man healed and saw. And the blind man had said to Jesus, "Thank you." And Jesus said, "No, it wasn't me. It was your faith. It was your belief. You, the blind man, got to the same point of belief in yourself as I already have in you. And therefore your physical reality transformed to align with our shared belief." And people call these things miracles. You know, they call them miracles. So these miracles can come from an intensity of belief, an intensity of faith. You know, people said about Steve Jobs that he had a reality distortion field around him because he had such intense passion and faith about his vision and his view of how reality could be. And he said, if you got too close to Steve Jobs, you started to believe things that you didn't believe before. And I see Jesus as the same sort of character. If you got close enough to Jesus, if you touched the hem, you were healed because you got caught up in this incredible belief system that he had. So, you know, that to me, wow, what coaching. And of course, the disciples who then, you know, chose to commit to that path, became believers, were not sort of, you know, through their own then passion and commitment, told the story. I mean, Jesus didn't even have to write a book. You know, I've had to write a book in order to get a message out there. He didn't even have to write a book because the message was so powerful to the people who experienced it. They just went and talked about it. And then we had like 2 billion people on the planet, sort of following that as a way, you know, alongside other great ways that other great spiritual leaders have also brought to us. So yeah, that's a little bit of me with Jesus the coach.
Yes, absolutely, and I think, as you said, you know, we know from the Gospels or the narrative around it that the incredible thing was, as you said, he chose quite often to believe in his disciples who were not seen to be leading figures in their society. He wasn't choosing the ones that people might see in that context as being wise. He was actually choosing the very, inverted commas, lowly, humble, and stuck with them and worked with them. There were times when probably he was tearing his hair out, which perhaps coaches may well do at these times. We chose about what to do when things go wrong. And of course, things did go wrong on that. But as you said, he stuck with that vision, that sense of knowing and actually truly believing in someone, even when and encouraging them to do, you know, at times the impossible, you know, and inviting them, I think, because I think that's another word I like, John, actually, and I think perhaps that Jesus has. It wasn't a tell, it was an invite, wasn't it? What comes to my mind, you know, walking on the water, when he invites Peter to come out of the boat, there was an element really of that for me of an invite, but it's believing in himself, believing in Jesus. There was something about that, isn't there, that actually he could do something he thought was not possible. And isn't that a beautiful thing around coaching?
Yeah. And it was an invitational model. There was no compulsion, but there was a very clear invitation. as indeed there still is today, a very clear invitation. But I believe in inviting people on this journey. I don't believe in compelling them or pushing them or forcing them, or demanding. And that is a coaching approach, isn't it? I think coaches can issue invitations, but they're not issuing sort of decrees in terms of thou shalt.
And the reason we may revisit this when we get to the humble habit, but there's something again that's just come to me, that as a coach, to be able to let go and actually be comfortable with the fact that actually the coachee may do something that might even outstrip you, because one little known verse you're probably aware of in the Bible, when Jesus turns to disciples and said, you can do greater things than I have done, which for me is ultimate. It's like a coaching statement, isn't it, of real faith in them.
It is indeed. Yeah, great.
So John, you've mentioned one book. We know that you've published a book, Coaching Poetry from a Spiritual Path, where it says, whatever your own religious beliefs, these poems will challenge you to think deeply and inspire you to take the next step on your own spiritual path, your leadership path. So I invite you at this point to share from this book a piece which connects to you, to your heart around choosing to coach. Yeah,
great. So the poem I'm going to share with our listeners today is called Birds on the Runway. And I wrote this poem. I can remember now that I was looking out of the window of an aeroplane, and the aeroplane was just taxiing down the runway. And in front of us on the runway, I could see this huge flock of birds. And of course, suddenly they took off from the concrete as the plane revved up its engines. And for some reason, that inspired me to write. So as I sat in that plane, I can't remember exactly, but probably as I sat in that plane, I probably just wrote, and this is what I wrote. It's called Birds on the Runway. And the reason I'm sharing it on the habit of coaching is it's about potential and the things that get in the way of us fulfilling our potential. Birds on the runway, a thin veil, a cloudy sky, the flutter of settling wings, birds that stall our progress, like mice and lice and other little things. A strange mix of phobia and respect welds us to a past we loathe. And yet they wait for us, those smiling faces on the other side, forever waiting, forever smiling, forever hoping and keeping faith, sketching the good times to come. How could we let them down? How could we mothball our dusty engines? We scatterers of the birds, we clearers of the mist. When will we change our minds and honor our forgotten selves? When will we stop using our past learning as the light to guide us now?
Wow, wonderful, wonderful. Again, John, just so very rich, and the sense for me of, you saw those birds and it had some sort of meaning on it, and maybe that is that actually, choosing to coach helps bring out this meaning. It has a depth to it, doesn't it, John? That's what we're saying here. You've said, it's a skill people can learn, but maybe at the essence of in this exploration, in this podcast, it's saying actually it really does impact. I think, if let's stick with one-on-one coaching, it impacts, I believe, both individuals for the positive impact of the organization. And almost that poem was at that third level listening or looking in your example, wasn't it, of what's here and what can this actually share. So thank you for sharing that. I've got a copy of the book myself, so I shall go back to that one. So thank you.
Great.
Oh, well, John, as we come towards the end of this podcast, for those that are listening that are thinking, actually, I've really enjoyed this, I've really got a sense of this choosing to coach habit, how can I go around exploring, discovering the 9 habits of trust for myself? Is there a keynote, a workshop program or something, a newsletter, something I can sign up for? How can I work with the Trusted Executive Roadmap?
Yeah, if it's caught people's imagination, the next port of call really is our website, www.trustedexecutive.com. On that website, there's opportunity to sign up for our newsletter. There's a YouTube playlist of videos that will go into each habit. There's various blogs. So lots of resources there, David. I think that's the portal really to get more information and to explore further. There's the book, obviously, on the website. You can download a free chapter, the first chapter of the book. So yeah, we try to make it as easy as possible for people to just explore, take the next step. And clearly then if it becomes something that people want to work with at a more personal or organizational level, then we can help with that through the various, what we call journey of trust offerings that we can provide, that we've now sort of used to put this theory into practice, and with people like Fiona over the last 4 years, a lot of organizations have helped us put the theory into practice, and we've been able to create, ready-made sort of solutions, if you like, now that we can offer to other organizations if they want to put trust at the heart of everything they do.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. Plenty of places to follow up. And what's just come to me as well, that for someone listening to this podcast where they've been touched by some of that and it's given them some insights and they're excited about it, what's an email they can connect with you, John, if they just want to drop an email to you and say, John, I've listened to this Choosing to Coach podcast. I just want to share this insight that came through this podcast for me. What's a relevant email they can use?
Well, there's an email. My email is john@johnblakey.co.uk. So pretty straightforward, john@johnblakey.co.uk. But also I would encourage anybody on LinkedIn, if people want to connect on LinkedIn, if they want to reach out on LinkedIn, then I, posting a lot of material on LinkedIn around this topic. So again, that's a great sort of connection point for people.
Thank you, John. It was just a spark. I just had this sense of people listening, watching, going, "Oh, actually, I'd love to take this and just share it." So I know the sort of person you are. You'd love to hear those.
Yeah.
So thank you, John, and thank you for stepping out into the business world with a real heart and a real passion for supporting businesses to be the very best they can be. And I invite you to say a few closing words to those listening before we bring this podcast to a close.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for coming along. Thank you for giving your time. I talked about how generous it is as a coach to give time to people. So thank you for giving us your time. And I hope that you are leaving feeling encouraged and inspired, motivated to explore, and in particular, intrigued about these coaching skills, listening, asking, empowering, and thinking about how can you take those skills to the next level, recognizing that amongst these 9 habits, we know from our research, this is a habit that in many organizations is underutilized. So, if we want to use that language of competitive advantage, then you can secure a competitive advantage by mastering this habit of coaching. And I hope that this podcast has just given you that motivation to see the potential of that and to take the next step on that path.
Right. Thank you, John. I'll just let those listening that for the next podcast, habit number 3 is choosing to be consistent. So until next time, may you all have a wonderful day.